right, I think we're good to get started. So it's really nice to meet everyone. Hopefully you guys are all here to learn Google Analytics. This course is going to be an intermediate. So I'm just going to go over today's agenda. I'll go over some logistics, and then we'll dive right into the course. So it's really great to be here. We're going to be together for roughly the next 8 weeks, maybe 9, because I think we're skipping a few days. But this course is really all about intermediate or advanced Google Analytics, which you can kind of use interchangeably. So my plan for today is to really walk you through just a quick refresher. Today's lecture is going to be all about audiences or advanced segments, which I think is really what separates you from being a beginner to an intermediate user. And then we'll cover some other specifics towards the end. So to start off, I'm just going to start by giving you a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Charles Farina. My title right now is Manager of Digital Analytics at Analytics Pros. I've been using Google Analytics for about 10 years now, almost all of which have been with Google Analytics certified partners and premium resellers. So what that means is I've been working with some of the top consultants previously at Enor. Now I work at Analytics Pros for the past 3 years. And what I get to do is I do a lot right now of the training for our 360 clients. I also still do implementation work. I do a lot of strategy, but I also do quite a bit of business development. So on a yearly basis, I travel about 120,000 miles visiting clients talking about Google Analytics. And I'm really excited to share with you in this course everything I've picked up over the past 10 years. So these are some of the clients that I've worked with specifically at Analytics Pros, many of which you guys are probably very familiar with, like Tableau, GoPro, SAP, Starbucks. So I'm very familiar with a very wide variety of use cases around it, B2B, B2C, e-commerce, publishing, you name it. So just a little bit about my background. I don't write code, but I know enough to be dangerous. I pretty much know everything about Google Analytics inside and out. So any sort of questions you have, I'll be able to either bring in someone else, Analytics Pros, if we need to talk a little bit more about code. But most likely I'll be able to answer the vast majority of questions that you guys come up with. So just real quickly to go over some logistics, you should have gotten an email from Maddie. Our class on 4/5 has been rescheduled to 4/24. The reason why is I have been fortunate enough to be able to attend Conversion XL with the group leading this training today. So we're going to reschedule that class to 4/24. Another point, if you notice in the webinar at the bottom of your bar, there's a bunch of buttons. While it might be tempting to ask your questions in the appropriately named Q&A section, please don't. Just use the chat box to ask your questions. It'll be easier to kind of corral everything into the chat box instead of from there. Someone already asked one if I was in the GTM course too, and that's actually my colleague Jacob Schaefer, who's in 2 conference rooms over for me leading that course right now. Which is the intermediate GTM course. So I'm a different Analytics Pros person. So for the class structure, we're going to spend 60 minutes together kind of going over the lecture, and then we'll have roughly 30 to 60 minutes after every class of open Q&A. So my hope is if you guys have questions or anything that you were really hoping the lecture could answer and I didn't get to it or I didn't cover it, we'll have plenty of time to go over your specifics after. I'm also in the Facebook group that you guys should all have access to. So please use that Facebook group if you want any help kind of in between classes. And what's really important to me, and I think for this lecture to be a success, is to submit as much questions and feedback, especially feedback that you have. I'm used to doing live custom trainings and really being able to read the room and shift or react accordingly. So I can't see all of your faces to see if I'm going too fast or too slow. So please definitely submit feedback after the lectures if you think I'm being too specific or I'm giving too much information. And I'll definitely take that and work on it moving throughout the course. But I definitely think you guys will find what we're going to do today very useful. All right, so for today, for the agenda, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to give you all access to a demo account. So if you want to, during this course, I'm going to try and do all of my lectures using this demo account. So you can use this to follow along, see exactly the same data I'm using. It'll be a little bit different, and I'll explain why in a minute, but we'll at least be using the same website and the same data set. If you have your own Google Analytics account, you're definitely welcome to use that to apply a lot of the use cases, because it might actually be interesting for your particular business. But still add the demo account anyways, so you have access to both. So after we get the demo account, I'm just gonna go over some GA 101 refresh, just a few things to make sure you guys are kind of on top of that, to be able to follow along on this course. And then for the vast majority of today, we're gonna be covering the audiences, which are also known as advanced segments. And again, that's what I think separates you from being a beginner to more of an intermediate. We'll finish by quickly touching on sampling, and then again, we'll have that roughly 30 to 60 minutes after to answer any questions or go over any specifics that you have. All right, so as far as getting access to the GA demo account, this should be really simple. So what I'll do is I'll take this link, I'll also put it in the chat, but I'll also show you how to get to it in case you can't find the chat box. So if you have chat, go ahead and click this link. Hopefully it shows up. Oops. Why won't enter? There we go. So there's the link. If you are in Chrome or whatever browser you use, if you simply search for the Google Analytics demo account, the first search result, which is not the paid ad, the first organic search result is for the demo account for Google Analytics. If you click that, that's the same link I have in the chat, about halfway down in all capital letters is access demo account. Go ahead and click that link, and depending on if you have Google Analytics account already or you don't, it's gonna give you different prompts. Just go ahead and agree to everything, and then you'll be thrown into the Google Analytics demo account. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to go ahead and do that, and then what should happen is you should have access to a new demo account. So I saved my demo account in a different Chrome user. Yours should be in the same. Give me 1 second. And what should happen is everyone should be able to see this demo account. So this demo account is for the Google Merchandise Store. This is a real website that Google has. So if anyone needs any ideas for presents or gifts or for Christmas, if you actually go to the Google Merchandise Store, this is the demo account that Google actually put a Google Analytics implementation behind and released it to the community to have kind of an enterprise configured implementation. So almost every report, feature, and use case is actually configured in this particular demo account. So this one sells t-shirts, certain Nest, some hardware, all sorts of stuff that's Google branded. I bought quite a few things on here. But what's exciting is we can all use this to follow along, and you guys can see the same things that I'm seeing. So one quick note, I mentioned that you might see something slightly different. As a certified partner of Google's, I actually have access to a 360 version of this, which I'll be using. So you guys can actually see some of the differences between the free and the paid version. The only differences that are important to you is my count of sessions and users and a few metrics might be off slightly from what you're seeing. So don't worry if it's not exactly the same, but you should be able to go through this and follow along very nicely. Okay, so let's go back to the lecture real quick. All right, so what I'd like to do right now is just take you through a GA 101 refresher. So just real quickly, 5 to 10 minutes on some features that you absolutely need to know. So the 4 that we're gonna talk about today are 1, date ranges, 2, the basic navigation, the dimensions, metrics, and definitions, and then sampling. So I'll be sending everyone this deck after. So if you need a refresher on the basic navigation, there's a great cheat sheet to follow on where things are in the interface. I can't stress enough how important it is to know what dimensions and metrics are available in Google Analytics. The only way you're going to get familiar with that is actually using the tool on a daily or weekly basis. But in the meantime, if you're not actually using it on that frequency, I have a link to a cheat sheet. This is a dimension and metric explorer in Google Analytics. If you actually take a look at this, it's a really great support article. This is more designed for like using the API or more technical. But what's great is, even from more of an analyst perspective, is if you go in here, you can actually see all the dimensions and metrics. And if you select one, it'll give you a definition where you can use it. So this is a great way to start getting familiar with the dimensions, metrics, and what's actually available. So again, I'll be sending that one over after. But what I'd like to do today is just start off with some simple questions to get you guys ready. So a question I always like to ask during my intermediate trainings. So when we talk about Google Analytics, some questions you can see here. What is a session? What is a user? So if we're looking in our demo account, these are two of the base metrics in Google Analytics, and almost no one actually knows what they mean. So for example, what is a session? So I define a session, which is also the same thing as a visit. So a fun fact, it actually used to be called visits in Google Analytics until about, I think, 2 years ago. And the reason why it's now called sessions is Google had sessions for mobile apps and visits for the websites. And when they released their cross-device capabilities and the ability to track cross-device, they actually unified it under one metric, and they chose to use sessions instead of visits. So that's why it's now called sessions, but you can use them interchangeably. So a session is simply a container of actions that a user takes on the site. So when we think of a session, I define a session by how it ends. And a session ends after one of three conditions. The first is after 30 minutes of inactivity. So anytime you come to the website and you don't do anything for 30 minutes, Google Analytics will end your visit. But every time you do something new, you get a new 30-minute window, and then that'll keep your session active. So at 30 minutes, your session ends prior to that 30 minutes, and that's the end of your visit. The second way it ends is at midnight of the time zone of the view setting. So if you were to go into the admin, into the profile settings, when you set it up, you have to select a time zone. And at midnight, in order to do daily processing, your visits will end. And then the third way is anytime a new traffic source is introduced. And this is going to be really important for a lecture on Wednesday when we talk about attribution. But if you're on the website, and let's say you came from Google by searching for something, and then let's say the business sent an email, and you checked your email during that 30-minute window, and you clicked on that email, that would actually create a new visit. So every time a new traffic source is introduced, the previous visit ends and a new visit starts. So that's some just quick definitions around sessions. And then just a quick refresher on users. We're going to be using this metric a lot in Google Analytics. So a user, by default, is a cookie. It's not an IP address. It's actually a cookie. So anytime a new user comes to your website, a cookie is created, and a random ID is put in that cookie. And as long as that cookie stays there, they'll be tracked as the same user. What's important to know is that for your business and for Google Analytics, if you have your own definition of a user, you can actually supply that to Google Analytics in addition to that random cookie. So by default, we're tracking that cookie, but you can actually create a new view in Google Analytics. And we'll talk about this in a later lecture, but you can pass your own ID, and then Google can use that to do cross-device and cross-browser analysis. And I'll talk about all sorts of tips and tricks, especially if you're doing email marketing. It becomes very important. So that's just some quick refreshers on some of the basics. What I want to do now is, I think, talk about one of the most important features, kind of bridging the beginner and intermediate skill sets. And that's your use of secondary dimensions and also the inline search filter. So we're going to go over secondary dimensions, and then I'm going to have you guys, using the demo account, Spend about 5 minutes actually trying to do these yourself, and then I'll show you how we do those, and then we'll dive right into our audience part of the session. So secondary dimensions in Google Analytics. This is what really starts to separate you from a beginner or an intermediate. The average user of Google Analytics will log in, and they'll simply use the left-hand navigation to navigate around all the reports, and that's great. But what's really important is with Google Analytics, what I think makes it so different than other analytics platforms is its ability to quickly connect different data together. And I'll show you what that means. So as an example, let's say we wanted to do some landing page analysis, and we wanted to find some pages that are performing well or maybe not performing so well. So a good place to start would be in the behavior section, underneath site content, in the landing pages report. So let's go there. And now what it's going to show us is it's going to show us our top 10 landing pages. All right, so if I'm an analyst, I'm going to take a particular page maybe that I care about. So maybe I'll focus on this, maybe I'll focus, for example, on the home page. So the home page, if we look at this right here, we can see it had 43,000 visits. And of those visits, roughly 50% left without doing anything else. So they came, they saw, and I lost 50% of my traffic right away from my home page. All right, so if I click on that, what Google's gonna do in this particular report is it's just gonna show us our landing page by itself. Now, what's important if we're thinking about kind of optimization and also campaigns, different traffic sources are driving traffic to this page. So if I'm gonna try and optimize this page, it's gonna be really important to know how my traffic's getting to this page and what traffic sources are driving the most traffic. So if you're familiar with secondary dimensions, that's the button right above your table. And you can click that button and you can easily add any dimension in GA. So for this, I'm gonna add our medium. So your medium is close to the channel. And by doing this, I can get a sense of what traffic sources are driving traffic to this page. And this is really important because if your business is doing paid traffic always drives high bounce rates. It's just the nature of paid traffic. So it's gonna be really important when you're doing optimization to be able to segment and remove different sort of traffic types that are either impacting negatively or positively in a way that's not necessarily desirable. So by using the secondary dimension, I can see right now, just by reading this chart, this is a really nice feature that GA has, is there's this percentage, and this percentage that you see here and here, it's always the percentage of the column. So I can read this and say that 43% of all that traffic is from organic. So being able to use a secondary dimension is really useful for being able to quickly dive in, add additional context, and find what you're looking for. So one other thing that you're going to need to know while we do these exercises together is this secondary dimension is also really valuable to use with your inline search to find something particular you're looking for. So maybe I want to compare social and referral for this particular report. I don't want to look at any of my other channels that I'm looking at. So you would think maybe I could just type in social in this search box and hit enter. We'll see what happens. It returns no results. So a quick refresher on the search box is click the advanced right here, and you get additional searching options. So by default, when you're using a secondary dimension, the search feature will always search off of the primary dimension. So what I need to do here is change the search to the medium, and now I can say, only show me, for example, social. And as another 101 refresher, one of the most important things to remember from that course to now is something called regular expression. Remember, regular expression is essentially simple characters or symbols that we can use to do very powerful lookups. The only one that you really need to remember now, or just as a refresher, is your pipe character. And that's above your return key. So if you press your shift key, and then just type in that straight line with no spaces. So again, it's the pipe above your return key. You can type, for example, social pipe referral or social type organic, hit apply, and now it's going to use that secondary dimension, and it's going to show us anything that matches social or organic directly on the table. Another quick refresher is this filter right here is actually set to regex by default. So as we're going through our exercises today and all of our other things, if you actually use this search box and use those pipe or those symbols directly in this, it's actually regex right away. So just as a quick example, if I type, for example, Nest or YouTube, Google Analytics will actually accept this and now show me any of my landing pages that contain either Nest or YouTube, which you can see returned right here. So again, let's actually go to our exercise, and I'd like you guys to spend, what we'll do is we'll do about 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes on this, and try and answer each one in a different tab. All of the exercises that we're gonna do in this lecture, the best way to follow along is to actually kind of start up a new tab or copy and paste your first report into a new tab, so that as we're going through, you can compare my results to yours and kind of compare. So for the exercises, try and do these 3 really quickly, and then we'll review these together. So in the demo account, what age and gender combination has the most amount of revenue? The second question is, what percentage of your mobile sessions is from direct traffic? And I'm asking the percentage. And the third one is, what percentage of the New York metro area, so that's a geography dimension, landed on the homepage? So one of the things this should show you going through this exercise is it's going to be really important as you're becoming more of an intermediate user to start knowing where the different dimensions are. So if you can't find them, definitely try and search in Google to see if you can quickly find it. Otherwise, I'll show you at the end real quickly where those are. So let's spend just about 3 minutes on that, and then I'll review together how to do each of these. So there's a question on the time frame. So right now, the time frame that I'm using is the last 30 days. You can open up your date range selector, and you can simply select the last 30 days or change the date range manually, depending on what you're looking to do. But I'm using the last 30 days. So if you're having trouble with the first one, it should be in the audience section underneath demographics. You simply need to add a secondary dimension of either age or gender to either the age or gender report. So just flip those. If you're stuck on the second one, for mobile sessions or for direct traffic, you should probably either be in the device category report, which is in the audience overview. That'll show you device categories, and then add a dimension of medium. Or you can go to the audience and you can go to the medium or source medium report and then add in device category as a secondary dimension. So device category and medium or source medium are the two dimensions. And then the third one is going to be a bit tricky. You have to remember how to find the metro report in the geo in the audience section. Otherwise, you can go to the landing pages and then add metro once you isolate the home page. All right, so let's review these together real quickly. So the first one was what age and gender combination had the most amount of revenue? So for this, I would go to the audience section. We can go to demographics, and then again, either the age or the gender. And what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna apply the other as a secondary dimension. So if I'm looking at the gender, you can see that male is about 70% of my traffic. Can add a secondary dimension of age. And then the last part is if I sort by revenue on the right-hand side, by default, it always sorts by the primary metric. So if I sort by revenue, I can see that 25 to 34 males are about 30% of my revenue, followed by 35 to 44. For the second question, it was what percentage of mobile sessions is from direct traffic? So for this particular question, I would start off by going to the going to mobile and then overview. And for either of these questions, again, there's not necessarily a right way to do it. So for the demographic question, you could have started off in age, or for this question, you could also go to the medium or source medium report. But either way, you're going to need both of the dimensions. And for this, if I add medium, now I can see device category and medium side by side. In order to answer what percentage of mobile sessions is from direct traffic though, it's not 4.7%. I need to search and isolate just mobile by itself. So that's where the search box comes in. And now I can see that 19% of my mobile sessions are from direct traffic, which is also known as none. And then for the last question, it was what percentage of the New York Metro landed on the homepage? So if I wanted to find the New York Metro, that's in the geo, in the location report. Another quick refresher, in many reports, in Google Analytics, there's reports within reports. And we can see that nicely laid out here. So we have our different primary dimensions of country, city, continent, subcontinent. We also, in this report, if we click on the US, we'll have different primary dimensions exposed. So now if I scroll down, I can actually easily select Metro just for the US. And now we'll see the top metropolitan areas for the Google Merchandise Store. So now I would just isolate New York by itself. And I'd go in and add that secondary dimension of that landing page. And now we'll have our answer. So about half, 49.94%. So that's secondary dimensions. So for that, that's one, I think, really important feature we're going to use throughout this course. So if you have any questions or need any help with this after, definitely please let me know. But for the majority of this lecture, what we're going to be talking about is my favorite feature, which is audiences. They're called advanced segments, but I like to call them audiences because I think that's what they actually are. But you can use those interchangeably. And when we get to our lecture on Wednesday, you'll definitely be calling them audiences too, because we'll be talking about how to use those in other Google products like AdWords, Optimize, Data Studio, and other things. So what is an advanced segment, or what we're talking about as an audience? So this is my definition. It's a condition which we're going to apply that filters the entire data. So all of the data in Google Analytics to either include or exclude all sessions or users that contain that condition. So this advanced segment is very different than a secondary dimension, as an example. So if I were doing analysis on the New York metro area, and I wanted to know everything about the New York metro area, what mobile devices did they use? What language are users visiting from? What landing page? What's the exit page? It would be really annoying if I had to constantly go to every report and keep adding a secondary dimension of metro, right? That would be a lot of work, and it might not even get at what I'm looking for. So an audience or an advanced segment is very different, because what it's going to do essentially is, instead of this audience overview or all of the data we're looking at now, which is aggregate data, where using that secondary dimension, I can filter a subset of the data. What the audience does is it's actually going to take every report and it's going to apply an audience to them. So instead of looking at the report with aggregate data, I'm looking at the reports with just the segment of traffic that I'm interested in. So the audience is going to allow it to stay with us everywhere we go. So quick intro to audiences. So your audiences are going to be available in every report at the top. It's above the graph, and we have our all users and we have an add segment button. You can click on either of these. But when you do that, it's going to open up our selector and also expose the builder. So in here, if we look at the system segments, everyone on this lecture has access to these same segments. So for example, we could go in and select mobile traffic. I could scroll down and I could select tablet traffic. I could scroll all the way back up and unselect all users. And you can see now it's added mobile and tablet. And if I hit apply, what's going to happen is it's going to apply these two audiences side by side. And now I can go to any report in Google Analytics and I can compare these next to each other. So as an example, if I wanted to answer a question, do different device types consume content differently on my website, right? How would we answer that? Well, one easy way would be to take these two segments, go back to the behavior, site content, all pages report, and we can simply compare the aggregate percentages next to each other. So let's look at our top 10 pages. So right here, I can see for a homepage, 31% of mobile traffic views our homepage, but 34% of tablet does, so slightly higher. Slightly higher tablet traffic also views the YouTube page, and almost double the mobile traffic views this particular search page. So we can just simply compare these and look at differences between those. So one of the biggest use cases of these segments is if you have things where there's mutually exclusive differences and you want to compare those side by side, right? Let's look at users who landed on the homepage versus users who didn't land on the homepage. Which was a more valuable audience and resulted in more revenue for our particular business. So you can answer that using audiences. So as an intermediate user of Google Analytics, now that you're not beginners, you'll probably never or very rarely ever use these system segments. So what we're going to be doing now is I'm going to show you how to build your own audiences. And that's where the real power of this feature comes in. But first, some quick tips. So as you notice, these segments stay sticky. So everywhere I go, they stay applied. So to remove an audience, you can simply drag it off the canvas by dragging this little grippy bar. You can also click the arrow on the right-hand side and click remove. But my recommendation is anytime you have more than one audience applied, instead of dragging them off, which is going to refresh the report and will be a very slow process if you're removing multiple, if you simply go to the selected tab, you can unselect both of your audiences, click apply, and that way the report only refreshes once. So with our audiences, you can apply up to 4 at a time. So you can compare 4 audiences side by side. So for this particular lecture, again, it's all about building our own audiences. So to do that, we're going to go to the Add Segment button, and we're going to click this new red segment option. This opens up our audience builder. So there's some really nice features and some things you need to know, and also some recommendations I have to get the most out of this. So the first, on the right-hand side, as we're building these audiences, they've added the ability to, so many phone calls. They've added the ability to actually see these audience, or see the percentage of audience that matches as you build them. Back a few years ago, you wouldn't know if the audience actually worked until you saved it, and that would be very painful because I made mistakes all the time. But now, as you're actually building your audience, you know what percentage is actually matched as you add your conditions in. The first, I think, biggest recommendation is I would highly recommend you not use pretty much any of the default menu options on the left-hand side to build your audiences. So instead of going into demographics and finding age or gender, or going into technology and figuring out where the browser is, you should always build your audiences in the advanced section in the conditions option. The reason why is in here, we have access to every dimension of metric that pretty much Google Analytics has. So we can easily add and combine anything instead of just sorting for a subset. So for all of the audiences that we're gonna build today and you're gonna build moving forward, please build these using the advanced in the conditions option. So why do we need an audience and why do you care about these? So if I were to ask you a question like, how much revenue did your homepage result in, right? How much revenue came from people who visited your homepage or any particular page on your site? If you're a beginner user of Google Analytics, you probably can't answer that question. There's no way to do it. So if we're looking at this report, this is the top content, right? So here's page views. I have page value. It says on average, every visit to that page is $7.81, but there's no revenue. And if I scroll up, there's no ability to add revenue to this particular report. So you can't answer that question. Audiences or advanced segments are designed for exactly this purpose. So what I can do is I can go to conditions and I can say, okay, homepage visits. So as you're building these segments, always give them a meaningful name so you remember what they are. I recommend putting the scope, so you can see this is filtered for sessions. So we could say sessions instead. And now I can sort for page. So let's look for page, it's halfway down the list. And I can say slash. So let's look for any session where the page contains slash. And if you look on the right, you can see I made a mistake already. That matched 100% of my traffic because every page has a slash. So I need to change my match type to exactly matches. And now I can click save and I can see, okay, 68.5% of all my users visited the homepage. And now I can take this segment to anywhere I want. Now, right away, you're looking at this report. So I'm looking at the top homepage sessions, and this is the top content report, the top 10 pages. Why are there other pages besides the homepage in this report? Does it mean my segment didn't work? The answer is, it did work, and this is the difference between a filter and an audience or a segment. When you're using the filter to isolate different parts of the report, you're doing exactly that, right? What an audience is doing is you're defining a condition. In this instance, I said, show me anytime our homepage was viewed. And what the audience does is it says, okay, here is the entire visit, and everything that happened before, during, and after that condition was met. So it's showing us all the pages that were viewed before the homepage was viewed and after, but only if the homepage was viewed. So now I can answer questions like, what was the most viewed page after or before someone viewed the homepage? And it's the basket page. Or I can go to conversions, go to e-commerce, and I can go to the overview section. And right here, it's going to tell me how much revenue came from users who saw the homepage at some point. So if we scroll here, we can see that revenue, $172,000 of revenue where the homepage was viewed at some particular point. So there was a question in the chat about, does exactly match include visits to homepage with query parameters as well? Like question mark x equals y. It does not. It would exclude those query parameters. So what you need to do is add a little bit of regex to have that, and I can type that up in a bit. And the other thing is Google's actually adding a matches type. I don't think it's available in GA yet. It's an optimize. So that would be another way to match the query parameters. But we can talk more about that after. Good question. All right, so that's our homepage audience. So right now we're looking at anyone who visited our homepage. Now let's try something different. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click this arrow, and here's a fun tip. You can copy audiences. So I click that arrow and I click copy. And now we're gonna look at a different condition for our audiences. So what I can do here is I can change this. So we're gonna say, instead of showing me a visit, because by default, the filter is for visits, show me any visit where the homepage was viewed. What that means is it's not showing us any visits before or after. So if the user visits the homepage on Monday, but buys on Tuesday, that revenue in this audience is not associated because it happened in a different visit where the homepage wasn't viewed. But if you look at the filter options, I can change the scope of this to be users and say, show me any user who viewed the homepage. And let's look at the difference of what happens. So I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna compare these two audiences side by side. Now, the revenue for the user scope segment is gonna be higher than the session scope segment. And the reason why is because those users purchased, again, before or after in another visit where they didn't view the homepage. But what the scope does is it allows us to answer those questions, like the if-then. Show me users who did a particular action and then ever converted. So using a user scope segment, you can add that and actually look across all of the visits at a particular user level and understand everything about them. So as you're building these particular audiences, the user scope is probably the one you're going to use almost always because it's the most important. It allows you to look across at a user level and understand everything about those users. Now, one really important thing about what we just did, we did not establish an order of actions. So I cannot say that a user who viewed the homepage purchased. That's not what this audience is saying. It's saying that a user who viewed the homepage purchased at some point, but it's not saying they viewed the homepage and then they purchased. So there's no order applied in these particular audiences. So when we start to add our conditions, like if I said, show me a user who viewed the homepage and then viewed another page, they could have happened in any particular order. So if we want to establish order, that's where the sequences option becomes very important. So in our sequences section, we can actually state an order where things occur. So I can say, for example, show me users who saw our homepage, so where page contains slash or exactly matches slash. And then I can say add a step. And if I wanted to say, and then they purchased, I would want to use a metric. So it's pretty awesome that in these audiences, you can actually use dimensions and metrics at the same time. So I can say, show me users. So I changed my scope from sessions to users, where page exactly matches slash, and transactions per user is greater than 0. And then on the right-hand side, we can see that that matches 1.92% of our users. So again, the definition of a segment is we're defining a condition, and that condition is filtering all users or sessions and everything in that that occurs to allow us to do our particular analysis. So Mickey, I'll send the slides after, and you'll have that particular definition for you as well. So for this, user scoped is one of the most important, and then these sequences are really important for establishing the order where the actions must occur. So I'm all about exercises, so I'm going to have you guys all try some quick exercises, and then we'll review those together. So before we do that, just a quick recap. Our advanced segment types. You can always set an audience to user or session. Almost always you're going to be using users. It's just recommended. And then for some other just tips for sequences, that enforces order. And then we're going to talk in another lecture about product scoping. We have a whole lecture around enhanced e-commerce, and there's a particular scope in there that's important as well. But what I'd like you guys to try and do is to answer these particular exercises. So for each bullet, main bullet, please use a new tab in GA because you can only have 4 segments applied at once. So for the first exercise, you're going to actually have 3 segments. So this one is really, I think, one of my favorite exercises. So for the Google Merchandise Store, can you create 3 segments to compare the difference in the conversion rate based off of how engaged the user is? So what's the conversion rate for basically your users, or you can use visits, you can scope it however you want, where their session duration is under 5 minutes? What's the conversion rate for 5 to 10, and then greater than 10? So we're trying to answer, basically, the more engaged your user is, what is the more likelihood they are to convert? And one thing that's really important, when you're using the session duration metric for this first exercise, it's in seconds. So multiply 5 by 60, multiply everything by 60 seconds. So it'd be 300, 600, etc. For the second report that you guys are going to have, create a new audience for users who viewed more than 10 pages and who didn't purchase. So page views greater than 10, transactions equals 0. And for the third one, how many users went through this specific path? So they visit from Google, they viewed a Nest page, and then they added any product to their cart. And for adding a product to the cart, there's actually an event action called add to cart, and I'll show you how to do that. But let's try and spend 8 minutes or so on this. You probably won't get through all of those, but I want to make sure I leave some time to talk about sampling quickly at the end. All right, so just spend a few minutes on that and then ask any questions as they come along in the sidebar. So Andrea, you need to change the filter at the top from sessions to users. When it's set to sessions, you can only see sessions or hit, but when you change that dropdown at the top to users, then it'll expose the user option. And then while you guys are working on this, it looks like Sven asked, what are the pitfalls of the concept of user in GA? So when we talk about users, I assume you're probably talking about cookie deletion or cookie loss or anything like that. There's not really any pitfalls. It's just the nature of the analytics and the data we have. So almost every analytics system by default will use cookies to identify users. So everything should be highly directional. They're going to be deleted at roughly the same rate. But what we can do is, again, where possible, we can start to supply our own user IDs, and we'll talk about that in another lecture. And then also, if you've familiar with a few of the other Google products like AdWords or DoubleClick, Google started actually exposing cross-device identifiers based off of Google logins, and everyone's logged into Google. So I would hope that that would be coming to Google Analytics soon, because that would be quite a feature to have. No one's going to have a percentage of logged in users like Google. So stay tuned for that one. But to answer your question directly, it's not really a pitfall, and it's not really a big problem for almost any of our clients. They're not already using it, that identifier. They're going to expose it hopefully soon. It's available in AdWords and DoubleClick for cross-device, but it's not available in GA quite yet. All right, so if you're on the first one, the session duration is the metric. And then again, you're gonna want to use the less than 300. That's gonna be the seconds. And then if you're doing the second segment, which is session duration between 5 to 10, you're going to wanna use session duration less than 300. I'm sorry, is greater than 300, and then add the and condition, and then do less than 600. So that'll be between 5 to 10. And then the third one is simply greater than 600. And if you use our copy feature that I showed you in your audiences, that'll allow you guys to create those 3 audiences just a little bit quicker. So for the first one, make sure you're applying those 3 segments to the e-commerce overview report, which is in the conversion section. That's where you can quickly see the conversion rate. And for the second one and the third one, you can apply those segments anywhere. So you could be in the audience overview or any other report, doesn't really matter. If anyone's stuck, let me know. Just a few more minutes. So the event label for add to cart, use event action. And if you just type add space 2, it should auto-populate, but it's an event action. So for that, the dimension name is event space action. Okay, it's okay if you're not done. I'm gonna quickly walk through these, especially the first one. So again, if you have segments applied, easiest way to add or remove those is to remove them all at once. Otherwise, everything refreshes slowly. So go into selected, unselect, and now we're done. Okay, so we're in the e-commerce overview report already. So all I have to do now is apply the audience I'm looking to get insight on the conversion rate. So I'll add a segment, and in order to save time, what I'm gonna do is I think I already have a few of these created. Session, or maybe not. There you go. So the first one, session duration less than 5. I have greater than 10. So I'll show you the conditions for these. So I'll apply these first, and then I'll show you the condition. So what you should have seen for the demo account, which makes sense, is that the more engaged the user was, the more likely they were to convert. So if they were on the site for less than 5 minutes, 0.68%, but if they're on the site for more than 10 minutes, the conversion rate for that particular audience jumped up to about 18%. So why is this important? Well, on Wednesday, we're gonna talk about how to use these audiences to do dynamic remarketing. So you can actually allocate your budget the more engaged someone is, and then spend less money the less engaged they are, and then you'll improve your ability to increase your ROI easily using these same audiences. So for the conditions, if we go into the edit, all we needed to do was to use the conditions option, and the metric name was session duration, and then you just play with the amount of seconds and then add your add condition if you need to get 300 or 600. But that was pretty much it, pretty simple. For the second question, we wanted to look at users who viewed more than 10 pages but didn't purchase. And for Carlos, for either of these, you could use pretty much user or session. User is probably better, but session is probably more appropriate since you're trying to find during that visit if they were more engaged, so they purchased or not. For the second one, we wanted it to be users since I asked for users. So first we're looking at viewed more than 10 pages. So that is a metric called page views. So we'll say page views per users is greater than 10. So what's really interesting about that is it's actually summing the page views across all of the sessions. And then if I also wanted to isolate and did not purchase, I could do, for example, transactions per user equals 0. So this is an intermediate class. So I'm gonna give you guys some of the more confusing parts of Google Analytics because it's fun. You'll notice that there is an add filter and also an and option. So you can either say and or add filter. These are both similar to ands, but in certain situations, like if you were doing 2 conditions at a user level for page, it's gonna end up in 0. So I could really confuse you and try and explain the difference between these two. But essentially, you can always build your audience in the same filter box until it gives you 0 and you don't know why. Then take the second condition and add it in here. And I'll happily explain that in the Q&A section. But in certain situations where you're using the user scope, where things actually end up being 0 users, it's because you need to take the second condition and add it as a separate filter. And the simple reason is just due to the evaluation of how it's scoping the data. But it should never return the incorrect data. It's either kind of all or nothing. So when you have the nothing, that's when you come in and use the second box. So there's a question of the difference between using page views and page depth. So another fun feature in here is the question box in here. So the page depth, you can see here, it's a histogram of the values of the number of pages ranging from 1 to 20. So you're not going to want to use that. You're going to want to use the page dimension. Okay, the third one was kind of the more tricky one. So for the third one, we're looking for a particular path, right? So path 1 was that came from Google. So for this, we're going to want to use either the source or the source medium dimension. And we'll cover traffic sources much more tomorrow. So step 1 is they came from Google. We can add a step and say step 2 was, I don't remember what step 2 was. Step 2 was they viewed any nest page. So we'll say page contains nest. And step 3 was that they added something to the cart. So for this one, it's an event action. That's where they're tracking add to carts. And we'll talk all about that in the e-commerce lecture with more to come. So what's nice is it auto-populates. So there's our add to cart. And then I can change sessions to users or leave it at sessions. And on the right-hand side, it's going to return the audience that came from Google, viewed a nest, and added something to the bag. Again, something that's really important. I said add to cart. I didn't say they added a nest to the cart. So it's applying that they could have added anything. So that's where I can start to get more specific, and I can add things like product or other information to scope it if I actually wanted to see if they added that particular product to the cart. So that's our crash course to audiences. We're going to be using these pretty heavily throughout the rest of the lecture, especially tomorrow when we talk about the audience integration for other products. So those secondary dimensions and those audiences are essential for being able to move away from aggregate data and essentially have questions, build an audience that matches that question, and then find the right report that allows you to answer that. So we're going to be using these audiences for a very long time to come. So there was a question about, can you say something about followed by? So you're always going to use followed by. So you'll see in the drop down here, it says step 1 is followed by, or step 2 is immediately followed by. The reason why you're always pretty much going to use followed by is immediately followed by in Google Analytics means the next hit. And I try not to talk about hits too much because no one likes to talk about hits. But a hit is an event, a page view, an interaction. And when you're actually having more of an advanced implementation and you're tracking events and page views, it's usually very rare where you're looking for something where it's actually the next hit. You're just looking for, did this occur some point later? So that's why I would recommend you almost always use followed by. I've never used is immediately followed by in about 3 years. So if you have a great use case, great, but I think is followed by will always work for you. All right, so there's just a few things to end. We're running a little bit over time, but that's okay. I wanted to just give you a quick note on sampling and then dive into the Q&A. So sampling is something that's really important to know about in Google Analytics. Sampling occurs anytime we move away from the aggregates. And actually, before I get back to sampling, I left off one really important thing about audiences, and I'm sorry. But before we actually move away from audiences, one thing that's really important to note is these audiences are only saved to your login. They're not permanently changing the data. They're applied on the fly. But what that means is this audience is not available to anyone else that has access to your Google Analytics. So if I were to come up to the top and I were to share this particular report, the other user who loads it, it would load without those audiences. So there's a few ways to share these audiences and share things in general in Google Analytics. The first is when you click the arrow, you can come in and you can click share. This gives you a link, and then you send that link to someone else, and they save the audience, and then they go to the report. Maybe not necessarily ideal, but way to share an individual segment. Another option is edit. There is a way to save segments now globally for all of your users. And you can do that in this little hidden right-hand corner where it says segment is visible in any view. If you click change, if you're an admin or an editor for that Google Analytics account, you'll have a third option which says collaborators and I can apply or edit this segment in any view. So none of us have that access because this is a demo account. We just have you only. But for your own Google Analytics, in this change option, you can save a segment and it'll save it for every user. And when they open up this builder or you share links, it'll load with those segments or they'll have access to it. So that's the second way. Another kind of quick tip is if you wanted to simply share a report with the segment applied and you didn't want them to go through all that hassle, if you're just sharing one segment, if you click this preview button, it's kind of a hidden feature, but if you click the preview button, what it does is it just saves it, or it just applies it without saving the segment. But what's neat is this URL, if you were to grab and send this to another user, it would actually send them that report with that segment in preview. So it's a quick way to share reports without actually saving the segment at all. So that's a quick way to do sharing that way. The last way is in the admin section. If you're trying to share a lot of assets at once, so maybe you want to share 4 advanced segments, in here, you can actually go to the Share Assets button, and you can easily go in and select different assets like channel groupings, custom reports, segments, and you can click Share, and it'll share one URL, and then that URL will save all the segments at once. So some quick ways to go about sharing. All right, so that was it for advanced segments. Now I'm done, I promise. So back to sampling. So just a quick note on sampling. So sampling in Google Analytics happens anytime you move away from the aggregates. So if you're on the free version of Google Analytics, which is what we're going to be talking about pretty much all today, and you have a large set of data, and I'll talk about what that means in a second. But the way sampling works is on the left-hand nav, all of these reports are available unsampled. Sampling only occurs when you either add an audience or you go in and you're adding secondary dimensions. So in summary, anytime you move away from that aggregate report, sampling can occur. And when it does occur, you'll see it at the top. So right now we're looking at an unsampled report. This report is based off of 100% of our sessions, which is great. So sampling happens on the free version of Google Analytics anytime during the date range you're looking at, you exceed 500,000 sessions. So it's determined by the date range. It's not determined by the audience, it's determined by the aggregate data set. So you need to look at all users. And in any particular date range, if you have more than 500,000 sessions during that date range, sampling is going to occur for you. And how much more data you have over that 500,000 is the sampling rate that you're sampled at. So as a kind of a guideline, anything over 20% is likely directional to what it would be unsampled. But I start to get nervous anytime I come in and I see sampling rates under 20%. So we're going to talk about sampling in more detail in a later lecture. There's different things you can do to work around sampling in the free version. You can reduce your date range. That's the easiest way. If you're trying to do reporting for an executive report or something, there's a variety of API tools like Next Analytics or Shuffle Point or the new API that Google Analytics just released, which will actually do your query by day. So it does daily sampling instead of monthly or whatever date range you're looking at. But in the free version, there are ways to kind of work around sampling, but it's just important to pay attention and really keep an eye on what's happening with that sampling if you guys are using the free version of Google Analytics. So again, sampling happens anytime we're moving away from the aggregate data set, and that's something we can talk about much more in Q&A. So speaking of Q&A, that was all I wanted to cover today. So we went over some Google Analytics basics. Secondary dimensions are extremely important. I'll send over these slide decks after. So if you need a refresher on the dimensions and metrics, where things are in GA, the date range, there'll be some use cases in there, as well as a link to the Academy. So you can go through some free training on Tuesday and then be more up to speed for our lecture on Wednesday. So for Wednesday, we're gonna go over attribution. So I'm gonna go over all the different ways Google Analytics does attribution, how to do multi-channel funnels, some of the attribution modeling, how to answer really important attribution questions for your clients in under 5 minutes. And then we'll end that lecture with remarketing integrations. So using these audiences we used today to actually drive action, which is going to be very valuable and important. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. And then I'll also have some resources in the slide that I promised, and also some blogs and resources you can follow as well. So if you're going to jump off early, I'll see you on Wednesday at 9 a.m. If you're going to stay, there's already a few questions. So the first was, could you discuss how to use UTM parameters to bypass the regex issue you discussed during secondary dimensions? All right, so I don't think we're using, okay, I think I understand the question. So let me clear my audiences. Give me 1 second. So I'll show you guys why these query parameters are really important. We also have another lecture somewhere in the middle of our course around kind of audits and clean data, and I'll give you a quick preview on that as well. So content in Google Analytics can actually be one of the most challenging things to analyze because the default way Google Analytics records a page is they record the raw URL. And URLs can oftentimes be messy. And the reason why is if you take something simple, like let's take a page here. Let's just try the slash page. So if I type in slash, see what happens here. Let me try this one. All over the place. So there are query parameters. So it's not just UTM parameters, Carlos. It can also be query parameters. So URLs, so if we go back to the merchandise store, you could go to this URL and you could have something like class equals true. We're in class today. And most sites will accept any query parameter in their URL by default. So what happens here is Google Analytics now has one page view for shop.googlemerchandisestore.com, which is just the backslash, and another one of backslash question mark class equals true. It's the same page, but now our URL is broken out into two. And worse yet, the pages report is actually case sensitive, so we'll cover that later. But for example, if I was trying to isolate anything with store or a question mark after, what I could do is I could do something like this. I could say, let's find anything that's store.html. So if I do contains, if I just do /store.html, it's fine. Here's all those query parameters that we mentioned before. So they're all included. But this is something where if I'm the analyst for this account, I'm gonna wanna go in and clean up all these query parameters, because it's not true to say that only 5,453 views of the store happened. In actuality, it was 7,241. So the reason why the homepage gets tricky is because when we search for the homepage, every page contains a slash. So if we were going into our advanced option, I could either do exactly matches slash, or I could say something like, or, and this is where the problem occurs, right? If I said something like, or show me where page contains, or better yet, begins with slash question mark, right? So you can see here's all the query parameters. What happens is when you apply this, it returns no results because that was an and match, not an or match. So this is where we need to use this regex up here. So if I go back and I filter this, I can type caret, so we need to use caret. Your caret in regular expression is begins with. So we can say begins with a caret, and then I can say something like this. I can use a group and say $, meaning it immediately ends, or it follows with a question mark. So I'll do \question mark, and I'll put this in chat. But now I should see just anything with my homepage or anything with a query parameter in it. So there's the regex I used for that. So it was caret for begins with, followed by a grouping. And the grouping was it either immediately ended after the slash, so the $, or it was a question mark. And the reason why there's a \/ before the question mark is because I'm escaping it, because it's actually a special regex character. So if you're interested in getting deeper with regular expression, if you just search for regex cheat sheet for Google Analytics, there's like 15 of these. And I printed off one of these and put it on my desk because there's a lot of characters that allow you to do some really powerful lookups and some examples of what those are over here. So here's a good one. I'll put this in chat as well, but you can use this for regex. Any other questions? I don't see anything else yet. Anything? All right, if there's no other questions, again, feedback is definitely appreciated. I know there's some asking. There's going to be some material sent out to ask about that. But let me know if you guys like the lectures. If you don't like the lectures, I can make this much more in the tool, out of the tool. You guys, it's all determined by you. So thanks for the feedback. It looks like we do have another question. What's the best way to consolidate blog post data that has an additional slash on the end of a URL? So that's a good question. And this one is a bit tricky. So what Kylie is asking about is, again, Google Analytics is just tracking the raw URL. So if I go to my own blog post, so let's go to analyticspros.com/blog. What often ends up happening is a lot of websites will accept URLs either with or without the trailing \. So the way I would recommend you consolidate it is exactly what happened here. You can see that when I type in something without a \, WordPress is automatically redirecting it to the URL with the \. So if you can work with your development or IT or do some Google searches to find whatever CMS you're using to add in redirects that enforce it at the website level, it makes everything significantly easier. So I view that particular problem, Kylie, as a website problem, not a Google Analytics problem. So you'd want to fix that on the site itself. If it's something for whatever reason you can't fix it, and you do need to go in Google Analytics and do that, if you just search for Google Analytics trailing / filter, you'll find quite a bit of support articles or blog posts to help you remove it. It's just really important if you're going to do this, like Lunametrics has a really good one, that you do this in a sandbox view first. So if you're gonna play with these filters in the Lunametrics post, go into your admin section and go into your view settings and create a new view and apply that filter there and test it for a few days. Because I've made some really big mistakes with this particular use case where I actually added a filter to remove the \. And again, if you were actually looking at the behavior report, you'd notice that your homepage is just a slash. So I've accidentally removed my homepage in Google Analytics before, which was really bad. So if you're gonna play with these filters and you can't fix it on the site itself, test it in a sandbox view for a few days and make sure it looks correct. But Lunametrics has a good post to help you do exactly that. All right, 6 new messages. Sure, I'll see if I can add some homework into the slides as well for Mark. Okay, we'll send out the slides after. See you guys all on Wednesday, and thank you guys so much for joining. It was a pleasure.